We got a lot to go over today, so I'm going to get after it and hopefully give you some new insights into this craze called GLP-1s. I want to make it clear, I think they're fantastic. I think that they're being misused about 90% of the time, and there's not a full thought as to why people are regaining their weight back, why they lose lean muscle mass. And we just want to go through all that. I mean, the very first thing is, of course, is that I'm here on behalf of, infinite food allergy testing, the FAST test, and I think it's core to the real long-term wellness of the individual. So why do we look at food allergy panels? And I've been doing food allergy and sensitivity testing now probably 30 years. I mean, it's been a while. And so, obviously as you age, you break down your mucosal barrier, type of diet you have. If you're a ketogenic diet individual, typically you create more circulating endotoxin. That makes a difference. The obvious things like stress levels, cortisol, inducing more interleukin 6, triggering claudin 2, when claudin 2 breaks down those tight junctions in the epithelial tissue. And obviously, environmental burden, things like glyphosate make a difference. The level of physical activity, the harder you train, the longer you train, especially in endurance, you break your gut lining down. And that's been published over the last 2 years. And then, of course, the big issue of drug usage, meaning that 24% of the drugs on the market disrupt the microbiome. And then there's, where's my nutrient status at? Do I have enough phospholipids? Where's my magnesium pool at? What is my vitamin B status? Am I triggering a lot of oxidative stress due to low omega-3 fatty acid status? All these things are important. And I think one of the reasons people got so desperate to run out and I got to use a GLP-1 is that there wasn't a full thought about their metabolism. It isn't like they can go to any doctor and really get worked up to understand what's broken in your metabolism and what do we need to do to correct it. And I just want to knock this out to get started is understanding that testing for food allergies is incredibly important because if you're continually stoking the immune system with the foods you're eating, you're triggering and progressing metabolic inflammation, otherwise known as metaflammation. And that metaflammation leads to the erosion of the mucosal barrier, in addition to a host of other problems. So you want a full complement of testing, IgE, IgG, IgG for the complement C3BD. You could think of, looking at secretory IgA as well. You can look at secretory IgA as it relates to their competency of their gut, right? It's 20% of the US population is thought to have IgG food intolerance. And then what we say is, oh, IgG doesn't matter because you're eating it all the time. Well, the problem is if you're eating something all the time and you're building IgG response, by default, it means your gut's probably permeable because you would build that response because of antigen presenting cell activity. The microbiome definitely, it changes with age. It changes on a day-to-day basis. So this whole concept of, where's our microbiome at, testing for the microbiome, do you have pathogens, do you have dysbiotic flora, where are you at? Incredibly important. And it's incredible to think about this, but it's like you can give all the microbiome support you want. But if they're still stressed out, if they're still eating the wrong foods, right? Gut's not going to change that much. If they're still eating foods they're sensitive to, they're going to be triggering all this inflammatory signaling. So from that perspective, you kind of want to start with the end in mind, which is a fully integrous gut and a fully balanced homeostatic immune system. That's where we want to be, but you can't get there if you're swimming upstream all the time with stress, environmental burden, and in particular, the one thing people have to do every day is they have to eat, right? So they're reacting to foods. This is the infinite test, and I want to get past this and get into the science of everything else. So, but it's important to just understand that you can see very clearly with the infinite test, reproducibility is tested continually with infinite. This makes it simple for the person to understand what I should do or not do. Obviously, the more disrupted their immune system, the more important it is that they take out all their foods, that are yellow and red. I would say that if somebody's barely in the yellow on, say, IgG, I'm less concerned about complete avoidance of that. If it has, the complement path with it, well, then that's a different story. If the complement path is there, it means that IgG is getting stoked up. So you see a very comprehensive food panel here with all the most common foods and most importantly, identifying across the various functions. Why is IgG4 so important? Because it drives a lot of autoimmunity. If you look, you can see where's the total reactivity by panel. So you can see, well, where are they at? Obviously, if they don't have a lot of C3, if they don't have a lot of IgE, that's kind of good. You look at this individual, they're in that moderate to significant immune disruption because they've got a fair amount of, complement path C3 that's already activated and a fair amount of IgG4 already trying to neutralize the IgE. So if you look at the restrictions list, you want to think about, well, anybody with autoimmunity, autoimmune thyroid, MS, you name it, right? You want to have that most severe restriction for them because that's where they're going to, really calm their immune system down. If it's somebody saying, hey, body composition, I don't have any signs of autoimmunity, you could start with just the red highlighted foods. In general, for me, unless the list is overwhelming, my dietitians, we go with red and yellow, unless it's such a big list that we have to then look at the yellows and go, okay, what's barely reactive in IgG? Can we get rid of that? IgE, typically, we want to make sure we're dealing with that. So I personally, in our clinics, will preference red IgE, right? Because IgE drives IgG4, and then the C3BD. If you look here at the accuracy of the test, repeatability and reproducibility is very high. I think that's fantastic that they're so dedicated to making sure that the results that you're getting are accurate. So now I want to jump into the science. And as you all know, I'm a big, if you've heard me at all over the last 30 years, since I first started lecturing on metaflammation before it was a term, look, there's a lot of things that are working against people. High-fat diet's a big one. I mean, I know you got to do it. For example, I was on the phone consulting with a 2-month-old with mitochondrial disease that they're going to have to change their, to a higher lipid diet because they have Lee syndrome, right? There's times where you need a high-fat diet, cancer cases, maybe, seizure disorders. The big thing is getting the fiber in to go with it. Insulin release. So is this whole thing of chronodisruption. In general, people go to bed too late. They're under a lot of stress. They use alcohol to get to sleep. A lot of people do. They pick the wrong foods. But as these lifestyle choices are occurring, sleep disruption, light pollution, excess stress, which affects allostasis, right? It alters your insulin release. It alters mitochondrial function. It alters nutrient metabolism and absorption. Well, right away, that's going to disrupt your gut lining. And so you should be on the lookout for food allergies. Like, to me, food allergies are at ground zero of how you can help people. Now, you could start with an elimination diet, and if they do well, that's great. But once they cross that barrier to autoimmunity or significant pain, they really should be considering, hey, I need to do a food allergy panel right away. At least get that baseline inflammation out of the body. I've used this slide before when I've done talks with Rupa. This is what you're faced with every day with people, right? They get to their tissues, inflammation is triggered. The inflammation is there to try to correct whatever the insult was, and you're supposed to switch the inflammation off. The problem is when people get into chronic meta-inflammatory processes, and that could be a CRP of 1.1, a homocysteine of 11.7, a mean platelet volume of 14.5, a GFR that's at 55, an insulin at 11, a glucose at 95, right? All these markers that show that the body is pro-inflammatory. Look, you could do a urine pH for that matter. Urinary pH is directly correlated to oxidative stress. Once you get in that inflammatory stance, by default, the gut barrier starts to break down. That's even if they don't have an insulting pathogen. That's just a metabolic inflammation causes the breakdown and the leakage of the tight junction. And then you layer on top of that people with diabetes. You layer on top of that people that are on medications that are breaking down the gut lining, like PPIs, H2 blockers, statins, metformin, a lot of medications in that category, right? So, and I don't want to spend too much time on this. I'm just trying to get to that base understanding. If you look at this, basically, inflammatory signaling drives bad actor lipids, right? OxLDL, ApoB by default. If they're there, the gut's already altered. We know that people with insulin resistance, the higher their serum lipopolysaccharide, the more the symptoms of metabolic syndrome is in them. Muscle loss. As your cortisol goes up, you trigger inflammatory cytokines, you lose dynamic muscle perfusion, you lose signaling of growth hormone. Not that I'm a big, hey, do lots and lots of growth hormone, but you should naturally be making your amount of growth hormone. And of course, as you age, it starts to go down, and hence peptides could have their value there. And then, of course, you get into the situation of high iron, low ferritin, which is kind of an early sign of metabolic inflammation. But then as you turn to insulin resistance, you see the toll receptor 4, you see the TNF alpha upregulation. They really should have listed IL-6 on this because it's super important. IL-6 makes the insulin receptor not fire, but your insulin receptors aren't working. Now you're creating a highly acidotic environment, right, within the cell because you're making more lactate and pyruvate, but then you're pumping that lactate out into the interstitial space. And now all of a sudden you've got this intracellular acidotic effect as well. And of course, that leads to weight gain. And then bone loss comes, and then neurologic function gets compromised because of the upregulation of Gall-3, otherwise galectin, which you can measure. But the end of the funnel is a loss of mitochondrial function. So why did people jump out into GLP-1s? It's because they were already squarely down this funnel. And nobody was saying, oh, wow, your health is in real trouble. Let me explain to you why you can't lose weight. And in the same time, they kind of needed those incretin hormones. They need that GLP-1 now because they're stuck in glucagon production. The issue is that people have been, getting overdosed, and they're using diabetes doses for solving their incretin hormone signaling issue. And while a lot of people would criticize the GLP-1s, I always try to explain to people, insulin's a peptide. Nobody would take insulin away from anyone. Well, GLP-1s are the same way. The only difference is you take your insulin away from somebody, they die quickly. You do GLP-1s and you don't allow them to have them. When they need them, they just die slow, right? They get cardiovascular disease, they get enlarged left ventricle, they get kidney disease, they get dementia. They get the byproducts of chronic metabolic inflammation due to unopposed glucagon signaling. So my biggest thing is I like getting people off of them. Like, let's get you on them. Let's titrate your dose to where you're losing 2 to 4 pounds a week, and let's go from there, right? And here's the big issue. When you're normal weight, and look, guys, like, just so you understand, my brother was 476 pounds. I understand obesity really well. I loved him more than anybody in the world. And he passed away young. When you're normal weight, look at where your immune system sits. Your eosinophils are regulated. Your Treg cells are regulated. You have M2 macrophages, so you've got that anti-inflammatory stance on your macrophages. Neutrophils. I look at neutrophil to lymphocyte ratios all the time, right? You want that around 1.7 to 2.2. If that neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio is greater than that, they're in an acute inflammatory response. And if it's less than that, that immune system's been pushing hard for a long time. You can get that stuff on a regular lab test. The problem is that when you get obese and you have a lot of visceral fat, everything changes. This is why people needed that bridge or that lifeline called GLP-1s to get the maladaptation of the signaling to store fat, make white fat. You got to get back to, making white fat beige and beige fat brown so you can burn it. GLP-1s help with that. But one of the big things that you can look at, of course, is, are they histaminic? Where's their histamine levels at? Right? You see the mast cell upregulation and the lower portion. And then you also see that, the neutrophils, of course, are either going really high or really starting to drop. The other piece to this is look at monocytes, eosinophils, and basophils, right? Monocytes make macrophages. If somebody's cranking out a 13 monocyte, that means more than likely they're making a lot of macrophages. Basophils greater than 1 indicate upregulated IL-6. And don't forget about the autonomic nervous system being incredibly important. You got a lot of COVID long haulers with autonomic nervous system dysfunction. You got a lot of people that are sympathetic dominant. They got a resting heart rate above 62. 2-minute heart rate recovery is terrible from exercise. They're not exercising. They've lost vagal tone. Their HRV is low, right? All of these issues are swirling in that individual. I thought it was going to be a magic. Oh, the GLP-1 for the consumer, not us, the integrative whole person health individuals. But the consumer was like, if I just do this shot, I'm going to lose weight. And you're going to lose 30 to 40% of your body weight in lean mass. The energy expenditure, you try to on and off a couple of times significantly. The whole purpose to this is understanding that where it is utilizing GLP-1s to help with the correction from autonomic nervous system dysfunction and sympathetic dominance and allostatic load down. And that's what I'm trying to get as many slides as I can and leaving 10 minutes for questions. Obviously, here's the immune system response on sensitization. The gut gets permeable. Hey, I'm on PPIs. Hey, I'm on oral contraceptives. Gee, I've been on 5 rounds of antibiotics in the last year and a half. I'm on metformin, whatever, right? Something makes your gut leaky. I just had a Parkinson's-like syndrome case. Roundup could have been a part of his meal plan. He sprayed so much of it on his garden. He should have just sprayed it straight in his mouth. No gloves, no protection, and he's got all this garden that he sprays Roundup everywhere. Breaks down the gut lining, has immune consequences. Antigen-presenting cell gets activated. You get a challenge, right? You get a challenge now. Something gets through that gap, and it creates those epitopes, the IgE, the IgG4, and the IgG responses, right? And the eosinophils get upregulated. You start to get more histaminic. And you got to remember, if you're histaminic and you're making a lot of histamine, you got to break that histamine down. You need aldehyde dehydrogenase to do that. The problem is when you make a lot of yeast, so if you're candida driven, you eat up that enzyme. So people become more histaminergic because they can't break the histamine down, which, everybody's got mastocytosis now, right? And once again, inflammation from that leaky gut. If you look, you see, antibacterial proteins against that pathogenic bacteria are supposed to be made. The problem is that as you get bacterial translocation, undigested food particles, hits the bloodstream. And once it hits the bloodstream, it's trouble, right? Triggers that inflammation. You have to correct the gut integrity and rebuild the mucosal barrier if you're going to sustain wellness on people. And if you're going to sustain weight loss, because you know what? People's signal for hunger and their signal for satiety come out of the gut. So I just put this up for you to see that all these different paths are related to the gut. So toll receptors, toll receptor 4, the NLRP3 inflammasome, which gets created, Treg cells and Th17 balance, and then, of course, IgA. And I would say that you have to think about, damage-associated molecular patterns, pathogen-associated molecular patterns, nutrient deficiencies that are taking place. There's so much pressure on the person's gut. So what are the big inflammatory mediators there? Of course, cytokine, lipopolysaccharide, which I think is the most critical to police because it activates toll receptor 4, it activates NF-kappa B, triggers a lot of systemic inflammation and damage to tissues. And then, of course, metabolites. So when you have unfriendly flora, you don't make as much butyrate. I don't make butyrate. I can't create a healthy mucosal flora. Let's tie this together now. My gut is disturbed. I got bad actors, microbiome. The Crips in the bloods. The Crips are winning. The gut's getting permeable. I'm triggering more lipopolysaccharide. The result being an increase in insulin resistance. This is a 2021 study in Oxidative Medicine and Cellular Longevity. And I love the title of this, Pathology, Risk Factors, and Oxidative Damage Related to Type 2 Diabetes, Mediated Alzheimer's Disease, and the Rescuing Effects of a Potent Antioxidant Anthocyanidin. So the point being is that you have to turn off the inflammatory signaling, the neuroinflammation. But if you only think of turning off the neuroinflammation on the brain, like using something like TV006, which is a immunologic that binds to galectin-3 in the brain, that's good. That's going to help. I mean, it's shown to reverse symptoms of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. Or, it's still under investigation, but that's incredibly promising. But the problem is, as long as you're making too much lipopolysaccharide, it crosses the blood-brain barrier and triggers that neuroinflammation. And that's an issue. So the toll receptor 4 and the lipopolysaccharide effect on the microglia of the brain triggers more insulin resistance in the brain, triggers less ability to utilize energy. And the biggest thing is it creates more oxidative damage on the neurons. Of course, when you look at it on, from the visceral adipose perspective, you make more lipopolysaccharide in the gut, you affect beta cell production, especially if you marry that with screwing up your circadian timing, because the master slave clock and that chronobiology, it's set on helping your beta cells know when to make insulin. When you screw up your chronobiology, because of late night sleeping, high stress, all those types of things. Now you've thrown off your beta cell signaling for the next day. So important to keep in mind, right? And this is just another study. It's 2013, but this is old. 2013. They're showing, this is, the journal Nutrients. Endotoxemia leads to insulin resistance. But yet there isn't one endocrinologist in the traditional world that I know that when they're dealing with people with diabetes, that they're saying, hey, we need to work on your gut health. Instead, it's, hey, you need to shoot more insulin and you need to get your blood sugar down. And then not realizing that insulin also drives inflammation, right? So it's rare that we see that traditional care actually create vitality and true health. It's a slow erosion. And I know my whole family was diabetic. You see it in action, right? So we need to correct the gut. You need to test for food allergies, particularly in the pre-diabetic and diabetic population. Now, I realize that's only 50% of the U.S. population, 1 in 2 people coming into your clinic. And this is happening at earlier and earlier ages, right? So now we've got tweens that are going on things like Ozempic when we haven't corrected their gut. They've lived on, processed food and antibiotics. Maybe they had eosinophilic esophagitis. Who knows, right? Just important to keep in mind. I just put this up to kind of drive it home. If you see this immunoperoxidase staining over here on the right-hand side, B and D are basically jejunal mucosa on type 1 diabetics. So what this is staining is the amount of inflammation that's taking place at baseline. So you have to do everything you can in people that insulin resistance diabetes are reaching for those GLP-1s because it's just a journey they're on. If they're not full-blown insulin resistant yet, but they've gained 20 pounds and nothing they do, no diet, no hormone replacement, no thyroid replacement, no managing their stress has corrected any of that. Okay, now what's the reverse of that? If you want to get people off of their GLP-1s, once you reactivate that signal and you get the incretin hormones working and they're accessing fat and their appetite, their food noise is going down. Well, the other piece to that, that's what you need to fix in order to get them off of it, right? Endotoxemia, once again, significantly associated with increased risk of incidence diabetes. So the higher the endotoxin that's circulating, so the more you break your gut down, the more the bacteria are dying off. If I've got reduced circulation into the gut, right, I'm going to be creating more lipopolysaccharide by default. And look, this just moves forward. People with mood disorders, I always test them for food sensitivities because you go from the GI tract to the blood, from the blood to the blood-brain barrier. Blood-brain barrier activates the mitochondria or the microglia to damage the mitochondria in the brain, and you lose neurotransmitter metabolism, right? When you're making a lot of acetaldehyde, which is a feature of candida, you make more salsolinol and beta-carboline in your brain, which are phenolic compounds. And then, of course, when you lose production of serotonin in the gut due to the 2,3-IDO pathway being upregulated, well, now I got too much kenurenic acid and quinolinic acid. I'm not making serotonin anymore. So until I correct that inflammatory signaling in the gut, people are going to be taking, and you've seen this with people, they can't get off their antidepressant, right? So it's a full thought of where do I start? Most people eat the same foods all the time. Their gut's already broken down. Test it, show it to them, make sure they see it in black and white. Other issues, right? Ghrelin. Ghrelin goes up. I mean, when you people on 800-calorie diets, another issue that I'm seeing in terms of GLP-1s is people just aren't eating enough because they're not hungry. And that's leading them to, issues around, they go to get off their GLP-1 and their ghrelin kicks in and now they're hungry again and they gain all their weight back. So really important to keep that in mind. And it's the same thing. Cholecystokinin is supposed to be released. And, a lot of times people have gallbladder dysfunction and bile acid dysfunction. So on every GLP-1 case that I have that we decide we're going to do, and when I teach at A4M with physicians in our certification course, we have them on artichoke and bergamot extracts because we want the bile acids to be produced because bile acids help with the integrity of the mucosal barrier. As the bile acid production goes down, the mucosal barrier is eroding. So PPY is obviously another amino acid that gets the peptide that gets excreted, and that modulates the gut-brain axis. And so I have my friends we're on a rooftop here, and my buddies were just putting out the furniture for the afternoon for folks, so excuse me a second. I wanted to give them a thumbs up. They're being very gracious. So inhibits gastric acid secretion, that's good. Increases water and electrolyte absorption, that's good. But we lose PYY when we break down our gut. We lose mucosal barrier vigilance. Modulates neuronal activity in the hypothalamus and the brainstem. That's right. It's going to tell you you're not hungry anymore. Low PYY, higher risk of obesity. Reduced PYY decreases satiety. And you guys have all experienced this, man. You think you're done eating and you just keep going. And your brain's telling you keep going. And it could be because you're not chewing your food, you're not getting the signal, but it could just be you're dysbiotic. And I think this is a lot of what we suffered from. Why was it a firestorm related to GLP-1s crossing the country? Because people didn't have metabolic health. It's simple. GLP-1s, obviously, big incretin hormone, decreases glucagon, improves insulin signaling, get the glucose up into the bloodstream, store glycogen in the muscle, don't store white fat, brown your beige fat, burn it, right? Short half-life on them, of course, not when you take a GLP-1. They've got about a 6-day timing on those. So that's one of the other things why I don't think people should work to be on them forever unless they are a diabetic that they need to be on that med, is your body is meant to pulse incretin hormones. So the quicker we can get them back to pulsing, the better. The reason I like titration of the dosing is it get to the minimum dose so that when you go to titrate them back off, it's not so hard for those incretin hormone receptors to adjust to the fact that, hey, it's not there now, but because stress is better, because I'm eating better, all of those things are playing a role in being able to get off. And you could use oral. Calocurb's a good example. Berberine a little bit, but probably Calocurb's the most evidence-based one at this point to help people once they get off. But even peptides like sermorelin can help people, So I kind of went through the gut microbiome. I don't want to go too much on this. Just the fact to realize that as you're aging, you're altering your immune function. And when you're altering your immune function, your gut is now really prone because of altered microbiome. That means I'm probably going to be breaking down some of the gram-negative bacteria that make lipopolysaccharide. And now I'm going to create more stress on my brain because the LPS hits the brain, triggers neuroinflammation. IL-6 goes up. The enteric nervous system takes that message and says, okay, gut, get permeable. And so it's just important to understand that you have to work on people's guts at every age now. You guys know that. And of course, here's that whole gut homeostasis piece. Once the opportunistic bacteria, you get more pro-inflammatory cytokines. As soon as there's more pro-inflammatory cytokines, there's a leaky gut, and you're going to be more prone to reacting to foods. And you guys have seen this. There's people that say, what do you mean? I used to eat peanut butter all the time. How come I can't eat peanuts now? How is it that avocado could be something that's bad for me? Well, because your gut's permeable and we need to repair it. And then, this was a really cool study. This is 2023 study on 1,575 individuals, including almost 300 centenarians. Compared to most older adult centenarians reported a youth-associated features in the gut microbiome. More bacterioid versus Firmicutes, which makes sense, right? Because Firmicutes being elevated leads to obesity. Increase in species diversity, so diversity of the microbiome. And not having a lot of pathobionts or dysbiotic pathogens. It's pretty strong. But I can tell you right now, we have a hard time with that because people don't get enough fiber in their diet. Even our vegetables and fruit don't have all the friendly compounds that we need in them these days. They're still rapidly grown in the most part. And then you layer in all the drugs people are on. The average 70-year-old could be on 10 to 15 drugs that are affecting the microbiome. So, longevity is this wish that we're all going for when we have to really dig in and get the basics done. Regular assessment of the microbiome important. I would say if you're going to do the microbiome, you should really work on doing food allergy testing. People should get their foods tested at least twice a year, just straight up. And here's that whole decreased bile acid information I gave you earlier. You're going to get the slides. You can read it, but all you got to do, decreased bile acids leads to gut intestinal dysbiosis, impairs intestinal barrier function, leads to leaky gut, aggravates the liver, triggers more liver enzymes, and then you lose epithelial stemness. That means you get some bile duct issues and basically eventually liver injury. I'm trying to get through these. I'll get all your questions. So once again, I'm trying to paint this picture for you to understand because I see so many people on these GLP-1s and they have no idea that they're just going to either be dependent on them or they're going to lose a bunch of lean mass from being on them unless we get them absorbing their nutrients, getting enough protein in their diet, realizing that GLP-1s actually help build skeletal muscle mass. That is the mechanism for them. So I've kind of listed this whole issue of dysbiosis and lipopolysaccharide and increased transcription of NF-kappa B and IL-1 beta, the barrier cell, they get broken down. You create all this translocation. So I'm not going to go through this again. Here's that whole slide on histamine. If you look at histidine to histamine, histamine goes to N-methylhistamine, and then imatazole acetaldehyde. Aldehyde dehydrogenase is needed for both to inactivate them. Aldehyde dehydrogenase gets used up as a byproduct of yeast metabolism because you're making a ton of acetaldehyde when you have yeast. And you have a lot of people with chronic candida issues, and therefore they stay upstream with this. They can't metabolize off their histamine. Histamine's super important. It's much more than skin wheals and rashes, although that's important. It's stomach cramps, it's vertigo, it's headaches, it's circadian rhythm disruption, it's the obvious of anaphylaxis, but it's hot flashes and flushing. And what do? We're going, hey, I'm going to give you ketotifen. We're going to do compounded ketotifen. We're going to do a vitamin C flush. All Band-Aids on bullet holes. It's good to do, but you got to get the why the histamine. If you're a mold case, you've probably activated your histamine gene, so you're going to have to go through SIRS protocol. But otherwise, it's a matter of correcting the gut-brain connection. And then there's environmental toxins, right? If you look at this, all of these either have immune activation, epithelial damage, shifts in the microbiome. You see, if you look at the mechanisms that disrupt the gut, I have those over on the right-hand side. All right. And then, of course, you have to realize that toxins induce insulin resistance. Insulin resistance induces more oxidative stress, creates a permeable gut. And then that distills down into mitochondrial dysfunction, folks. And when I start to get to mitochondrial dysfunction, I'm losing mitophagy. I'm losing autophagy. I'm not getting mitochondrial biogenesis. All of these being important. If you look at increased TNF alpha, toll receptor activation, IL-1 beta activation, all driving oxidative damage, leading either to a damaged cell, one more prone to create cancer. And since we all realize, people with diabetes are much more prone for common cancers because it disrupts cellular health. Semaglutide, if you look here, this study just shows that basically you lose 30 to 40% of your lean mass if all you do is do a GLP-1. Whereas my work as the chief science officer for Lifetime, as well as what I do with A4M, we know that we could keep that lean mass loss down to 5% or less if we get people to eat. We help their gut so they can absorb. We look at, as they're moving through this, are they getting 1.6 grams per kilogram body weight of lean protein? If they can't eat it because it's too overwhelming to eat a piece of meat that big, right, 3 times a day, what other options we giving them? Branched chain amino acids, essential amino acids, protein powders. And of course, semaglutide, let's just get through to this. There is not in the literature, and people are starting to talk about the depletions caused by GLP-1s. GLP-1s do not directly deplete these nutrients. GLP-1s deplete these nutrients when people undereat. And yeah, they're going to eat less, so maybe you got to give them a multivitamin, but it isn't a direct mechanism of drug-induced nutrient depletion. And it's because people undereat and they're not told what to do and, not followed close enough in many cases. I just gave you guys a slide for how to think about how to dose, semaglutide, tirzepatide. If you look down here for weight loss, start at 100 micrograms, titrate until you see them losing 2 pounds a week. If they're losing 2 pounds a week, you're reducing their risk of creating gallstones, basically. And then this semaglutide and lean mass loss. You don't lose lean mass if you feed enough protein and get people to exercise. They're going to need 3 30-minute sessions of strength, some kind of strength or weight-bearing exercise in order to maintain lean mass. The rest of it's up to them. It doesn't mean they have to go in and try to heave weights. You need something weight-bearing. It's going to help a lot. I know I've got programs that I've designed for 2.5 million people at Lifetime. Retatrutide's the next hot one. Realize that it's really going to be effective for weight management. It's the next horizon. Obviously, it's only available for research use right now. So you get these people buying it at research labs. I'm not an advocate for that. So I'm just telling you the future of this will be using retatrutide, which if you look here, really good for weight loss. I didn't fail just for the sake of time to put in what the dosing. It's 1, 2, 4, 8, 12 milligrams, typically between 4 and 8 is the sweet spot. I did make a list for you guys of what I do on every GLP-1 person. Now, I do more than this when we're teaching our certification course because we're evaluating cortisol curves, thyroid hormones, sex hormones, environmental burden, all those other aspects to their health. But this is the minimum you should think about. Fiber, mag, bergamot artichoke for the gallbladder, take 5 to 10 grams of creatine or a protein powder they're not allergic to, preferably the pluses or add-ons, a multi and a probiotic. But those first 5 bullets are kind of non-negotiables to get success. It prevents constipation. You need the magnesium for mitochondrial function and the constipation, and you need the protein. Couple peptides. And look, if you're cleaning up the gut, that's a whole different story, right? That's using things like biocidin, cat's claw, rebiosis, olive leaf extract, grapefruit seed extract, right? That's a whole different talk. But, those are the minimums. Then also think about peptides. I love BPC. I gave you a rubric here. If they're on GLP-1s, they should be on sun fiber. They should consider a probiotic. Do they need a digestive enzyme? They're belching, they're burping. I don't usually do enzymes. I usually make people chew their food. It's surprising how many people don't need an enzyme when they chew their food and you clean up their gut. This is kind of like that whole thing, a berberine, cat's claw, grapefruit seed extract, rotate it. And, what else do you need to do? BPC, KPV, Larazotide. Why BPC? Helps with the downregulation of TNF-alpha, improves the mucosal barrier repair. I'm not sold on its neuroinflammation reduction, to be honest with you. People talk about it. I think it's in the literature. I do chair the International Peptide Society and have written a couple books on peptides. Love a lot about BPC. I don't see often the neuroinflammatory response as much. Here's kind of the benefits on BPC. Why are we talking about this? Repair the gut while they're on their food allergy test, elimination. Now, the other one, of course, would be, and I gave you your doses here, 500 mics to 1.5 milligrams, 3 times daily, 30 days, easy. You could use a liposomal as well. And then KP is the other one. This acts as a natural immunologic, right? Your body makes KPV. It's a 3 amino acid peptide. Really good for decreasing TNF-alpha in the gut. Super important. Used in a lot of, inflammatory bowel conditions. I think you'd find it very gratifying. Why am I telling you about the peps and the nutrients? Of course, you do a food allergy test, you got to repair their gut because by default, their gut's already permeable. And this is kind of where KPV works, right? Keeps the tight junctions intact. Larazotide, maybe the last one, and I'm going to stop for questions. Larazotide's important because it was used for people that had celiac sprue, right? So that was what it was developed for. What's it do? It lowers zonulin. So it's a zonulin antagonist, and the tight junctions come back together when you do that. So Larazotide, 500 micrograms twice a day is usually enough. It's kind of pricey, so I usually put people on it 10 weeks and then just kind of move them into just continuing on BPC, KPV, and working on why their gut broke down to begin with. Metals, SIRS, stress, drugs, what's the reason? So Larazotide, phase 3 studies on it that are successful for blocking incidental exposure of gluten in celiac cases. So you reduce their symptomatology significantly, but I use it in people that just need their gut to heal. Once again, Larazotide, decrease zonulin, get the tight junctions to come back. Here's the other aspects to it that could be supportive, reducing non-alcoholic fatty liver, certainly an irritable bowel. So Larazotide's got a lot of benefits.
Welcome to Rupa Health, the best place to order, manage, and track results from over 30 different lab companies in one single place for free. It's going to take you under 2 minutes to sign up, and you can order any functional medicine lab for your client in under 30 seconds. Let me show you how it's done. So here's our beautiful interface. I'm typing in the name of my client, selecting the lab that I want to order for them, and hitting send. From there, Rupa and their amazing team handle the rest. They email the client, collect payment, and even offer an interest-free 3-month payment plan. We've also built the world's largest library of information about chronic health conditions, the lab tests that can help you find the root cause, and the evidence-based interventions that you can use to help people heal from them. It's called the Rupa Health Magazine. There, we have in-depth articles about almost any health condition you can imagine. And we give you step-by-step protocols that other clinicians have used to help their clients heal and that are verified by evidence-based sources. You should totally check it out, and it'll transform your practice. And we can't wait to see you. So make sure you sign up today at rupahealth.com.